The fluorescent lights of the emergency room buzzed overhead as Michael Jenkins sat on the edge of the hospital bed, his XXL shirt clinging uncomfortably to his 347-pound frame. At 52, he had become accustomed to the perpetual discomfort of his body, the sweating, the chafing, the constant struggle to catch his breath after even the slightest exertion. But tonight was different. The crushing chest pain that had sent him speeding to Boston General in the middle of his daughter's high school graduation party wasn't something he could ignore with another antacid or explain away as heartburn. "Mr. Jenkins, your blood pressure is 210/115, Dr. Patel said, her voice calm but her eyes betraying concern as she reviewed his chart. "These numbers are dangerously high. We call this hypertensive crisis, and frankly, you're lucky you didn't have a stroke on the way here." Michael nodded numbly, the reality of his situation beginning to sink in. Behind Dr. Patel, his wife Sarah stood with her arms crossed tightly across her chest, her face a mask of worry and frustration. They'd had this conversation before, many times, but always in the hypothetical. Someday he would lose weight. Someday he would take better care of himself. Someday he would be there to walk Amber down the aisle or bounce grandchildren on his knee. Someday had just crashed into today with terrifying clarity. "We're admitting you overnight for observation," Dr. Patel continued. "We need to get your blood pressure under control with medication, and then we need to have a serious conversation about your overall health." Later that night, as Sarah dozed uncomfortably in the chair beside his bed, Michael stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. How had he let things get so bad? He remembered being athletic in high school, the starting center for his basketball team, with dreams of playing in college. But then came the knee injury, followed by his desk job at the insurance company, the long commutes, the drive-through dinners, and the gradual surrender to convenience over health. His phone buzzed with a text from Amber. "Dad, please be okay. I love you." The words blurred as tears filled his eyes. 18 years old, heading to college in the fall, her whole life ahead of her. Would he be around to see what she made of it? The next morning, Dr. Patel returned with a cardiologist, Dr. Ramirez. The news wasn't good. His heart was enlarged, his arteries showing significant blockage, and his organs were straining under the combined pressure of his weight and hypertension. "I'm going to be blunt, Mr. Jenkins," Dr. Ramirez said, adjusting his glasses. "If you don't make radical changes, and I mean radical, you're looking at a major cardiac event within the year, possibly fatal." Michael felt Sarah's hand grip his tightly. "What do I need to do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You need to lose at least half your body weight," Dr. Ramirez replied, "and you need to completely overhaul your lifestyle, diet, exercise, stress management, everything." "Is that even possible?" Sarah asked, her voice cracking. "It's not only possible, it's necessary," Dr. Patel interjected. "And we have resources to help. There's a comprehensive weight management program here at Boston General. It includes nutritional counseling, supervised exercise, psychological support, and regular medical monitoring." Michael listened as they outlined the program, feeling overwhelmed but also experiencing something he hadn't felt in years: hope. Maybe it wasn't too late. As he was discharged the following day, Michael wheeled himself out to the parking lot, a bag of prescriptions in his lap and a stack of program information in Sarah's hands. The summer sun beat down on his face as he paused before getting into their sedan. "I'm scared, Sarah," he admitted, staring at the hospital building where he'd confronted his mortality. "What if I can't do this?" Sarah knelt beside his wheelchair, her blue eyes locking with his. "Michael Jenkins, I've known you for 30 years. You're stubborn, you're determined, and when you set your mind to something, you get it done. We're going to do this together, one day at a time." On the drive home, they passed the familiar landmarks of their Boston suburb, the fast food restaurants where he'd grabbed countless meals, the office building where he spent his sedentary days, the park where he used to take Amber when she was little, before walking became too painful for his joints. Back home, the remnants of Amber's graduation party still littered the backyard. abandoned paper plates, half-empty soda bottles, and a partially eaten sheet cake with "Congratulations, Amber," written in blue frosting. Michael stood in the kitchen looking at the cake, and for the first time in decades, he didn't feel the compulsive urge to grab a fork and devour what remained. Instead, he picked up the cake, carried it to the trash can, and let it fall with a satisfying thud. Sarah watched from the doorway, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "That's day one," Michael said, brushing crumbs from his hands. That night, as he lay awake contemplating the mountain he had to climb, Michael reached for his phone and downloaded a fitness tracking app. The interface asked for his current weight, target weight, and goal date. His fingers hovered over the screen as he realized the magnitude of the numbers. He needed to lose 170 pounds to reach a healthy weight. "1 pound at a time," he whispered to himself, echoing the mantra Dr. Patel had suggested. "Just 1 pound at a time." As the first hint of dawn crept through the blinds, Michael made a decision. Before Sarah or Amber woke up, he slipped on his largest pair of sneakers and a baggy t-shirt. Moving slowly and painfully, he made his way to the end of the driveway, then to the corner of their street. Every step sent shockwaves of pain through his knees and back, but he kept going until he reached the stop sign, barely 100 yards from his house, before turning back, sweating profusely and gasping for breath. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Tomorrow, he would try for the next stop sign. Chapter 2. The autumn leaves crunched underfoot as Michael completed his third lap around the local high school track. 3 months into his weight loss journey, and he had already shed 42 pounds. His XXL shirts now hung loosely on his frame, and he'd had to punch new holes in his belt to keep his pants from sliding down. "Looking good, Mike," called Trevor, a retired firefighter who had become Michael's unofficial morning workout buddy. They'd met during Michael's second week of walking, when Trevor had found him sitting on a bench, red-faced and winded, after barely completing a quarter mile. "I've got another lap in me," Michael replied with a grin, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cool October air. "Maybe even 2. The physical changes were the most obvious. His face less puffy, his movements more fluid, but the internal transformation was even more profound. His blood pressure, while still higher than ideal, had dropped to 160/90, allowing his doctor to reduce his medication. The chest pains had subsided, and for the first time in years, he could climb a flight of stairs without stopping to catch his breath. Sarah had transformed their kitchen, replacing processed foods with fresh produce, lean proteins, and whole grains. Michael had initially balked at the changes, especially the portion sizes that seemed laughably small compared to his former meals. But with Sarah and Amber both committed to supporting his journey, he found himself adapting more quickly than expected. "Dad, try this," Amber would say during her weekend visits from college, presenting him with some new healthy recipe she'd discovered in her dorm kitchen. "It's zucchini noodles with turkey meatballs. You won't even miss the pasta, I promise." He always missed the pasta, but he ate the zucchini anyway, rewarded by the pride in his daughter's eyes. Not every day was a victory. There were mornings when the scale refused to budge, afternoons when the cravings for his old comfort foods became so intense that he found himself sitting in his car outside Dunkin' Donuts, white-knuckling the steering wheel to keep from going inside. There were evenings when the exhaustion of constant vigilance left him irritable and snapping at Sarah, followed by shameful apologies and the fear that he might fail after all. One particularly difficult day in late October, Michael found himself alone in the house while Sarah visited her sister in New Hampshire. Amber was deep into midterms at college, and the emptiness of the house echoed around him. A commercial for pizza came on television, the cheese stretching in that tantalizing way that made his mouth water instantly. Before he could rationalize his way out of it, he had ordered a large pepperoni pizza and breadsticks, his fingers moving with muscle memory across the app on his phone. 40 minutes later, as he opened the box and the aroma hit him, Michael felt a rush of anticipation followed immediately by crushing guilt. He took one slice, bit into it, and was surprised to find that it tasted different. Too salty, too greasy. He put the slice down after 2 bites, closed the box, and sat in silence, confronting the emotional hunger that had nothing to do with food. When Sarah returned the next day, he confessed immediately. "I ordered a pizza," he said, the words tumbling out as soon as she walked through the door. "But I only had 2 bites. I swear, Sarah, just 2 bites. Then I threw it away." Instead of disappointment, her face showed understanding. "Michael, this isn't about never failing. It's about what you do after you fail. 2 bites and then stopping? That's a win in my book." The following week, during his session with Rachel, the psychologist from the weight management program, Michael explored the incident further. "Food was always my comfort," he explained, sitting in the overstuffed chair that had once been uncomfortably tight but now allowed him to cross his legs. "When my dad left when I was 12, my mom worked 2 jobs. I was home alone a lot, and food became my friend." Rachel nodded, encouraging him to continue. "I realized something when I was staring at that pizza. I'm not just losing weight, I'm losing my oldest coping mechanism, and that's terrifying." "So what will replace it?" Rachel asked. The question hung in the air, unanswered but essential. That evening, Sarah suggested they take a cooking class together, something they'd never done in their 28 years of marriage. The first session was a disaster, with Michael burning the salmon and Sarah oversalting the quinoa, but they laughed more than they had in years, and Michael discovered that the process of creating food could be as satisfying as consuming it. By Thanksgiving, Michael had lost 53 pounds. When Amber came home for the holiday, she burst into tears at the sight of him. "Dad, you look amazing!" she exclaimed, throwing her arms around him. For the first time in her life, her arms could fully encircle her father's waist. Thanksgiving dinner was a carefully planned affair, with Sarah and Amber preparing healthier versions of traditional favorites. Michael allowed himself modest portions of turkey, sweet potatoes, and even a small slice of pumpkin pie, all tracked in his app and accounted for in his daily calorie budget. As they sat around the table, Michael raised his glass of sparkling water. "I'm thankful for second chances," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "and for the 2 of you who make those chances worth fighting for." Later that night, as he logged his food for the day and prepared for bed, Michael caught a glimpse of himself in the bathroom mirror. He paused, really looking at his reflection for perhaps the first time in years. The man staring back at him was still heavy, still had a long way to go, but there was something different in his eyes. A quiet determination, a spark of self-respect that had been absent for far too long. 1 pound at a time, he reminded his reflection. 1 day at a time. Chapter 3. The snow fell in thick, lazy flakes outside the windows of Boston General Hospital as Michael sat in Dr. Patel's office for his 6-month checkup. At 268 pounds, he had lost 79 pounds, nearly halfway to his goal. "Your blood pressure is 142/85, Dr. Patel announced, a smile spreading across her face. "Still higher than ideal, but a dramatic improvement. And your latest blood work shows significant improvements in cholesterol, blood sugar, and inflammatory markers." Michael nodded, pride swelling in his chest. The journey had been far from easy. The holidays had presented a minefield of temptations, from office parties to family gatherings where well-meaning relatives pushed food as a form of love. He'd navigated those challenges with varying degrees of success, allowing himself small indulgences while maintaining his overall commitment. "We're going to reduce your blood pressure medication again," Dr. Patel continued, "and I think it's time we discussed increasing the intensity of your exercise regimen. Your body is ready for more." More exercise. The thought both excited and terrified Michael. His daily walks had extended to 3 miles, and he had recently added light resistance training with bands. But the idea of pushing harder, of truly challenging his body, brought back memories of his athletic youth that seemed simultaneously close enough to touch and impossibly distant. The next day, Michael met with Derek, the fitness specialist from the weight management program. They stood in the hospital's rehabilitation gym, surrounded by equipment that once would have intimidated Michael to the point of avoidance. "We're going to incorporate interval training," Derek explained, demonstrating a sequence of movements that alternated between periods of intensity and recovery. "This will help boost your metabolism and cardiovascular fitness." By the end of the session, Michael was drenched in sweat, his muscles quivering with exertion. But beneath the physical fatigue was an unexpected sensation, a rush of endorphins, a feeling of aliveness that he hadn't experienced in decades. "Same time Thursday?" Derek asked as Michael toweled off. "I'll be here," Michael promised. As winter deepened, so did Michael's commitment. He purchased a stationary bike for the days when snow and ice made outdoor walks treacherous. He joined Sarah for weekend hikes in the state park, marveling at how terrain that would have been impossible for him a year ago now presented a welcome challenge. At work, the changes were noticed and celebrated. His colleagues, initially skeptical of his transformation, now sought his advice on their own health goals. His boss, impressed by his increased energy and productivity, hinted at opportunities for advancement that had previously seemed closed to him. "Jenkins, you're like a different person," his boss remarked during their annual review in February. "Whatever you're doing, keep it up." The comment should have felt like pure validation. Instead, it triggered an unexpected wave of melancholy. Was he a different person? And if so, who had he been before? The questions lingered as winter began to release its grip on New England. On a crisp March morning, as the first hints of spring emerged, Michael reached a milestone he had once thought impossible, the 100-pound mark. Standing on the scale, seeing the number 247 display, he felt a complex mix of emotions, triumph certainly, but also a strange sense of grief. That evening, he found himself in the attic, rifling through old photo albums. Pictures of himself as a young man, athletic and confident, stared back at him. Then came the gradual progression, his body expanding with each passing year, his smile diminishing, until in the most recent photos he had positioned himself strategically behind others, trying to hide his size. Sarah found him there, surrounded by the photographic evidence of his transformation, both the decline and the recent renewal. "I was thinking," she said, settling beside him on the dusty floor, "that we should plan a trip for our anniversary in June. Maybe that hiking trail in Vermont we always talked about." The suggestion hung in the air, laden with significance. They had discussed that particular trail for years, always with the understanding that it was an activity for some future version of themselves, a version where Michael wasn't limited by his weight. "You think I could do it?" he asked, vulnerability evident in his voice. "I know you can," Sarah replied, her confidence unwavering. "And more importantly, so do you." The conversation shifted something in Michael's perspective. He had been so focused on what he was losing. Weight, yes, but also his old identity, his comfort foods, his excuses, that he had overlooked what he was gaining, possibilities, experiences, a future. The following week, during a particularly challenging interval training session with Derek, Michael pushed himself harder than ever before. His heart pounded, his lungs burned, but he refused to quit. "That's it, Mike," Derek encouraged. "You've got more in you than you know." As Michael completed the final interval, collapsing onto a bench to catch his breath, he realized Derek was right. He did have more in him, more strength, more determination, more life than he had allowed himself to believe for years. Spring bloomed across Boston, mirroring Michael's continuing transformation. By early May, his weight had dropped to 231 pounds, and he had begun jogging, actual jogging, for short distances during his morning walks. His old clothes hung on him like tents, prompting a shopping trip that Sarah insisted was long overdue. Standing in the fitting room of a department store, Michael stared at himself in the three-way mirror. The man reflected back was still overweight, still carried the loose skin that told the story of his former size, but there was an undeniable vitality in his posture, a confidence in the way he held himself. For the first time in his adult life, he purchased clothes because he liked how they looked, not just because they fit. As spring gave way to early summer, Michael faced one of his most significant challenges yet: Amber's end-of-freshman-year dinner at an upscale Italian restaurant in Boston's North End. The smell of garlic, butter, and freshly baked bread enveloped him as they were seated at a corner table. "Dad, you're down to what, like 2:30 now?" Amber asked, beaming with pride. "That's incredible. 2:26 as of this morning," Michael confirmed, trying to focus on the conversation rather than the basket of bread being placed on their table. "We should toast," Sarah suggested, raising her glass of wine, "to Michael, who has shown us all what courage really looks like." Michael raised his water glass, touched by her words but acutely aware of the menu in front of him, filled with pastas, rich sauces, and desserts that once would have been automatic choices. When the waiter came, Michael ordered grilled salmon with a side of vegetables, modifying the menu to fit his new lifestyle. As their meals arrived, he took a small piece of bread, savoring it slowly, rather than devouring the entire basket, as he once would have. "You know," he said, looking at his family, "a year ago, I wouldn't have believed this moment was possible. Not just the weight loss, but sitting here, enjoying a beautiful meal with the two of you, without food being the entire focus of my existence." Amber reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "I'm so proud of you, Dad, not just for losing the weight, but for showing me what it means to fight for your life." As they walked back to their car after dinner, Michael noticed that for the first time in years, he wasn't winded by the hill leading up from the restaurant. Instead, he felt strong, capable, ready for whatever challenge came next. That night he logged his restaurant meal in his tracking app, pleased that despite the special occasion, he had maintained his commitment to his health. As he prepared for bed, he caught Sarah watching him with a softness in her eyes that transported him back to their early years together. "What?" he asked, suddenly self-conscious. "I was just thinking," she said, moving closer to him, "that I'm getting to fall in love with you all over again, not because of how you look, but because of how you've found yourself in this journey." Later, as they lay together in the darkness, Michael reflected on her words. He had embarked on this path to save his life in the most literal sense, to avoid a heart attack, to lower his blood pressure, to see his daughter graduate college. But somewhere along the way, it had become about more than just survival. It had become about rediscovering who he was beneath the weight, both physical and emotional, that he had carried for so long. Chapter 4. The Vermont Trail stretched before Michael and Sarah, winding through sun-dappled forests and opening occasionally to breathtaking vistas of the Green Mountains. It was their anniversary weekend, late June, and they had finally made good on their long-standing plan to hike the trail they had talked about for years. "How are you feeling?" Sarah asked as they paused at a lookout point, the valley spreading out below them in a patchwork of greens and blues. Michael took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the clean mountain air. At 212 pounds, 135 pounds lighter than his starting weight, he moved with an ease that still sometimes surprised him. "I feel alive," he answered simply. They continued their ascent, Michael setting a pace that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. His new hiking boots, broken in over shorter trails near Boston, carried him surely over rocky terrain. His breathing remained steady, his heart strong and regulated. As they reached the summit in the early afternoon, Michael removed his backpack and stood at the edge of the clearing, arms outstretched, as if to embrace the panorama before him. In that moment, the physical transformation of his body seemed almost secondary to the internal journey he had undertaken. "Sarah," he said, turning to his wife who was capturing the moment on her phone, "thank you for believing in me, even when I couldn't believe in myself." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears as she lowered the phone. "You did the hard work, Michael. Every step, every choice, every day." They spread a blanket and enjoyed a carefully packed lunch of turkey sandwiches on whole grain bread, fresh fruit, and homemade trail mix, foods that had become staples in their new lifestyle. As they ate, Michael reflected on the past year's journey. "You know, when Dr. Patel first told me I needed to lose half my body weight, it seemed impossible," he mused, taking a sip from his water bottle. "Like trying to climb this mountain if you'd never even walked around the block." But you did it one step at a time," Sarah said, echoing the mantra that had guided him from the beginning. "1 pound at a time," Michael agreed. "And I'm not done yet." Indeed, while Michael had made remarkable progress, he still had about 40 pounds to lose to reach his target weight of 175, but the goal no longer loomed as an insurmountable obstacle. Instead, it was simply the next milestone on a journey that had become an integral part of his identity. The descent from the mountain was easier than the climb, but still required careful attention to footing and balance. As they navigated a particularly steep section, Michael noticed a middle-aged hiker struggling up the trail, his breath coming in labored gasps, his face flushed with exertion and embarrassment as other hikers passed him by. Without hesitation, Michael paused. "First time on this trail?" he asked conversationally. The man nodded, too winded to speak. "It's a tough one," Michael acknowledged. "I couldn't have done it a year ago. I was nearly 350 pounds then." The man's eyes widened in disbelief as he took in Michael's now sturdy frame. "Take your time," Michael advised. "The view at the top is worth every step." As they continued down, Sarah squeezed his hand. "You just gave that man hope," she said quietly. "I just told him the truth," Michael replied. "Sometimes that's all people need to hear." Back in Boston, life settled into a new normal. Michael's blood pressure had stabilized at 128/78, within the normal range for the first time in decades. He had been taken off all blood pressure medications and needed only annual checkups with Dr. Patel rather than the monthly visits that had once structured his recovery. His wardrobe had been completely replaced, not once, but twice, as he continued to shrink. The loose skin that remained as evidence of his former size was a badge of honor rather than a source of shame, though he sometimes contemplated the surgery that Dr. Patel had mentioned as an option once he maintained his goal weight for a year. In August, as Amber prepared to return to college for her sophomore year, the Jenkins family hosted a backyard barbecue. Michael manned the grill, expertly flipping lean turkey burgers and vegetable skewers, a far cry from the processed hot dogs and hamburgers that would have been his standard fare in the past. "Uncle Mike, teach me how to grill," demanded his 7-year-old nephew, dragging over a step stool to see over the edge of the grill. Michael lifted him up instead, strong arms easily supporting the boy's weight. "The secret is patience," he explained, demonstrating how to check for doneness without cutting into the meat. "You can't rush it." Across the yard, Sarah watched the interaction with a soft smile. Later, as they cleaned up after the guests had departed, she mentioned the moment. "You know, you couldn't have done that before, lifted Tommy like that." Michael nodded, the realization hitting him anew. "There are so many things I can do now that I couldn't before. Some of them I didn't even know I was missing." As summer transitioned to fall, marking a full year since Michael had begun his transformation, he faced a new challenge, maintaining his progress in the face of success. The urgency of the initial health crisis had faded, replaced by the more subtle but equally important task of integrating his healthy habits into a sustainable lifestyle. There were still difficult days. Stress at work occasionally triggered cravings for his old comfort foods. Holidays and special occasions presented temptations. The daily discipline of tracking his food, prioritizing physical activity, and managing his emotional relationship with eating required ongoing commitment. But these challenges now existed within a framework of success rather than failure. When Michael experienced setbacks, a week where the scale ticked up instead of down, a day when his resolve faltered, He no longer viewed them as evidence of his inability to change. Instead, they were normal fluctuations in a journey that had become a fundamental part of who he was. In late September, as the leaves began to turn, Michael scheduled a follow-up appointment with Dr. Patel. His weight that morning had been 199 pounds, a number he had scarcely dared to hope for when he began. "Onderland," Sarah had called it, wrapping her arms around him as he stepped off the scale. "You made it to Onderland, Doctor." Patel's office was familiar now, a place associated with progress rather than fear. As she reviewed his latest test results, her professional demeanor gave way to genuine admiration. "Mr. Jenkins, I've been a doctor for 23 years, she said, setting down his chart. "I've seen thousands of patients struggle with weight loss and hypertension. What you've accomplished in the past year is exceptional by any standard." Michael felt a flush of pride at her words. "I had a lot of help," he acknowledged. "You, Dr. Ramirez, Derek, Rachel, the whole team. And of course Sarah and Amber." "Yes, but ultimately you were the one who had to make the choice every day," Dr. Patel reminded him. "And that's the challenge going forward. Maintaining weight loss is often harder than achieving it initially." Michael nodded, understanding the truth in her words. "I'm in this for life now," he said. "This isn't a diet I can go off of when I reach my goal. It's who I am now." As he left the hospital, Michael paused in the same spot where, a year earlier, he had sat in a wheelchair, terrified and uncertain about his future. The contrast couldn't have been more stark, not just in his physical appearance, but in his entire approach to life. His phone buzzed with a text from Amber. "How did the appointment go? Still on track for Parents' Weekend next month?" Michael smiled as he typed his reply. "All good, down to 199, and yes, can't wait to see you. Maybe we can try that hiking trail near campus you mentioned." As he slipped his phone back into his pocket, Michael noticed a man being wheeled out of the hospital entrance, his obesity evident even from a distance. The man's face bore the same mix of fear and resignation that Michael recognized from his own experience. For a moment, Michael considered approaching him, sharing his story, offering the encouragement that he had found so valuable during his darkest moments. But he hesitated, understanding that each person's journey was unique and that unsolicited advice, however well-intentioned, might not be welcome. Instead, he silently wished the man strength, hoping that he too would find his way to a healthier life. Walking to his car, Michael felt the crisp autumn air fill his lungs, the solid ground beneath his feet, the promise of many more seasons to come. His blood pressure was no longer out of control. His body no longer threatened to betray him at any moment. The 170 pounds he had lost had indeed saved his life, not just by extending it, but by transforming it into something richer, fuller, and infinitely more alive. As he drove home to Sarah, Michael reflected on the words that had guided him from the beginning. 1 pound at a time, 1 day at a time. Simple words, but powerful in their truth. The journey wasn't over, it would never truly be over, but he was no longer afraid of the road ahead.